What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to a Face-Off video. I don't think I've done one of these in, more than a year. I think the last one might have been like Batman 3 and Witcher or something like that. But what this is actually going to be is it's going to be a Face-Off versus a Face-Off versus a Face-Off versus a Face-Off. It's actually going to be Assassin's Creed as a series, and which one of those I enjoy the most. Now, I want you guys to listen which one I enjoy the most. It doesn't mean it's the best one. It doesn't mean it's technically the best one. It's just which one is overall my favorite to have played or continue to play. There's a reason why I say that. We'll get to it in the end of this video. So the first thing I want to say is this. When the first Assassin's Creed came out, I really felt like it socked the hyperbole of a lot of the 3D action adventure games right in the mouth. It really handled control of movement much better than prior titles. And, at that time, I felt that a lot of the games like the Tomb Raiders and stuff were sort of meandering. None of those titles were actually doing as well when it came to movement. And Assassin's Creed sort of nailed it out, just absolutely knocked it out of the park when it comes down to it. And though it had some issues with the brain dead, just cheese dick AI, that AI where you were beating on its friend and it was sitting in the back just drinking wine and eating scrumpets, and you were kicking the ass out of the AI, you would kill it, and then they'd be like, oh shit, throw their shit away and run over to try to attack you. It was that one-on-one, even though there were 5 guys around you, kind of combat that really, really bothered me. But as a title, really shockingly enjoyed that. And there were some issues there, but it was a great overall first title. And then, of course, you get Assassin's Creed 2. Now, Assassin's Creed 2 added a lot of little things, like it added the ability to swim, and it also added disarming, and it added some other systems there on the side. I think that a lot of people sort of consider Assassin's Creed 2 the first game to sort of blow it up, right? The game that sort of launched the title into the size spectrum in which from that point on we expected, if that makes sense. And there's a reason why I say that as we move forward. And I think for a lot of people, it was the sort of love it or leave it kind of moment. Was the Assassin's Creed games going to be the games that you enjoy and want to play through because there's a lot of stuff going on the edges? Or is it a game that you look at and you go, oh my God, and you move from it and you're really never able to jump into it again? And I think Assassin's Creed 2 sort of, in a way, solidified that moment in time for me moving forward, that crux, that speed bump in the road of enjoyment. And I think in a weird way, it was like you could sort of see gamers split from that point on. It was like, yeah or no. And then, of course, you had the side games. Now, of course, the first side game was Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. I really, really enjoyed Brotherhood. It also, of course, added that multiplayer aspect that I enjoyed so much of Brotherhood. Unfortunately, sadly enough, as I was playing it, the multiplayer died almost instantly. I'm telling you, that shit just was like, boom, come and gone. And it's unfortunate because I actually really liked Brotherhood for its story and for that multiplayer aspect. And I think it fixed a couple things that I had an issue with in the prior titles. Then we go to Assassin's Creed Revelations. Now, Revelations added the hook blade, and it also added the bomb disposal unit, as I like to call it. No, seriously, there was like 150 or something like that bomb variations in that game. I'm not 100% sure, but apparently the Unabomber must have helped them with consulting on that title, because there was all kinds of weirdness in it. And really, I feel that Revelations was dramatically opposed to the awesomeness of the ones prior to it. Even if I had issues with Assassin's Creed 2, I felt that Revelations had all kinds of problems on its own, and that hook blade sort of sped up some of the navigation, and the bombs were cool for a little while, but overall I felt that that was actually a very messy title. Now again, these are just my opinions of the different titles as we move forward. And we're always, even in Revelations though, the one thing I have to sort of take my hat off and say that they were always looking at ways to improve things and add different aspects of gameplay, which I think is important as we move forward. And of course, as we look at Assassin's Creed 3. Now, Assassin's Creed 3 is probably the biggest game that I've ever been disappointed in but still liked in my life, which sounds really odd, but that's exactly what happened. Basically, Assassin's Creed 3 had so much that I should have liked, and even though I did like it, I continually played that game, and it was almost like that moment where you're like, why am I dating this person? It's okay, but it's not that awesomeness that I expected. That's pretty much Assassin's Creed 3 throughout the entire title. It had the first naval battles, and they were great. It had a character and a location and a time frame that I really, really enjoyed. And everything about that should have been great. It had the weather systems with the fog and snow, and it had the ability to go ahead and go and hunt and do this open-ended story where you basically were able to explore and do all this crazy hunting and stuff. In fact, I think that was the first one to really open up the open world like that. But in the end, I never really got into it as much as I thought I would. I enjoyed some aspects of it, but it never grabbed me. And I will say to this day, it's the most disappointing Assassin's Creed moments I have had, because it's one of those times where subconsciously you think Everything in this game is something I should like, and I cannot seem to enjoy it. Now, the next game is, of course, Black Flag. Now, Black Flag, Assassin's Creed 4, even though, let's be honest, it should just be called Assassin's Creed, Pirate Pants or whatever, but this is where they added a ton of stuff. They finally really nailed the ship-to-ship combat. They made it a major part of the story. They added pirates, and you have this awesome, basically this overall awesome, enjoyable new area to explore and a new way to play, which was going from island to island and sort of bits instead of this massive area. Even though there were some massive areas, these bits where you could sort of play around in the ship, and then you could land on an island and you could go about your work there and then jump back on the ship and go and explore again. I felt that Black Flag was very enjoyable. It had a unique story that was different than the rest, at least when it comes to sort of what was going on and the overall aspect of the title. But it still wasn't my favorite. I enjoyed it. I liked it. But there were games that came later that I felt were really, really enjoyable. And these are going to be sort of out of order, but the first one I want to talk about is Liberation. Now, Assassin's Creed Liberation was the first one to have a female protagonist, and it was originally on the Vita. And I think that that's unfortunate because they really didn't do much with the gameplay systems. Though you did have a couple improvements in Liberation, there was never that moment where I felt that this was a full console version, a full console title. They didn't do enough to it. I enjoyed the female protagonist. I thought some of the aspects were unique. I thought the story was okay, but it never grabbed me as much as I thought. And I've always felt that Liberation was the one title that, had they made it a full-fledged console title at the time, of course being the PS3 and the Xbox 360, we could have seen a really, really cool Assassin's Creed game. And unfortunately, I think forever that's going to be one of those titles that I look back on, and I really rue the fact that it was on a portable platform. Of course, the next one is Unity, thy game that name should never be spoken. Unity was broken and in such a mess when it was released that Ubisoft basically said, oh shit, we should give everybody another game. And I, to this day, still, even when I play the patched up version, it is patched up, but it still has a ton of problems. Unity never ever will probably be at a release point in which I feel that it's good enough to even look at again. And that's sad. Unity had some really cool stuff, especially with the way it did its lighting. It looked awesome. It had a somewhat interesting story, actually, and some changes to the combat that I thought could or should have been more enjoyable. But unfortunately, because it was mired in such a technical disaster, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time for a AAA title, especially with people's faces falling off in the middle of cutscenes, we never really got to enjoy it as much as we wanted. Unity is one of those games that, hey, you know what? This is going to sound weird. I don't want to remaster it, but I really wish they would go back and look at it and sort of fix everything up and re-release it in some kind of form. Of course, the next one, and this is where we get into my favorites, is Syndicate. For sure. Now, Syndicate is not my favorite, so some of you guys who know the Assassin's Creed games probably know where I'm going, unless you assume it's the 2D games, which it could possibly be. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, why did I like it so much? Dual protagonists, enjoyable protagonists. Yes, everybody liked Evie. I did not. I was not a huge fan of her. I actually liked Jacob and his stupid ways. I thought he was hilarious. When you really look at the situation and what they were in, he was sort of funny to me. I don't want to ruin too much, but I loved the HQ and how that worked. I loved everything about that game, the time frame, what you did, the world that you explored. The combat was very fun and unique and different. And of course, just like many Assassin's Creed games, it probably overstayed its gameplay welcome. But in the end, Syndicate was fantastic fun to me, and I like the DLC in Syndicate the most out of any other DLCs or add-ons or adjustments that have ever been added to any other title. I think they're probably the most substantive when you look at any title anyway, but I really like the Jack the Ripper kind of DLC, and I thought that was really well done. Syndicate, probably my second favorite of all time in these games, and I know a lot of people don't like Syndicate that much, but you know what? This is my list. Now, when it comes to my favorite, it's Rogue, strangely enough. Now, a lot of people might wonder why I like Rogue so much. Let me describe it in some ways so that you understand why it's my favorite, while it might not be the best one. While it might not even be the best reflection of Assassin's Creed, and here's why. It is the most edible Assassin's Creed. What do I mean by that? I mean that the dual lane of gameplay and story went along in equal amounts until the end of the game. Now, that's not like a lot of the other games, and I'll talk about this probably in one of my Walking the Walk videos where I'll discuss the two-lane idea of game development. But the easiest way to describe it is if you consider game development 2 lanes, one story, the other gameplay, they need to handle 100% of the traffic of the game. right? Now that means at any one point, one can be 5% and one can be 95%. Of 95% of it can be gameplay and only 5% story. But at all times, they need to be able to handle 100% of that traffic going forward. And they can never overstay their welcome. You can't have too many passing lanes here, right? And that's what you get in some of the Assassin's Creed games. You get a situation where you are neither developing nor perfecting your gameplay, but the gameplay is there, and that's what we call fluff, okay? So I want to make sure I repeat that. It's when the gameplay continues, but there is no perfecting or developing. Developing is on the developer's standpoint. It is their job to do. They develop, they introduce new systems, right? Perfecting is usually up to the game player. Now that's when a game player has learned new things, and whether it's by the developer or by the gameplay of its own nature or the way in which the world is created, the player continues to perfect their abilities. We see this in many games where you go through a certain area and then the next time you go through it, you have some new skills, a new bomb type, whatever, and you can now perfect that location and maybe come back and perfect it again. The Dark Souls games are good at this. The Bloodborne game is very good at this. Rogue was excellent because it just went in perfect line. I was learning stuff as the story was going. I was learning stuff, boom, done. Edible. A game that didn't take longer than 20 hours to beat. In fact, it took much less time than that to beat. You could enjoy the story, and it was a unique story. Yes, it's called Rogue, so most of you guys probably know what it was about. But it was fantastic because I was able to turn it on and play through it. And I didn't have that moment of abject, absolute sphincter crunching fear. When you look at a game and you go, oh man, I don't know if I have the time for this. Rogue, I never thought that. Rogue I turned on. It had ship-to-ship battles. It had exploratory gameplay. It had gameplay that was in time with the story that was in time with the gameplay, even though I admit I hammered a couple points on the story that I didn't actually like. The fact is, it was edible. And as an Assassin's Creed game, those Assassin's Creed games have not been edible in a long time, unless you are a 100%er or somebody who has a long time on your hands. And what happens is, when you try to enjoy an Assassin's Creed game, many times you get mired down in minutia, and that is not the way it should be. The gameplay part of that road, that two-lane highway, takes over, and it becomes repetitive instead of developmental. And that's the problem with most of those. Rogue nailed it. Anyway, so that's my favorite. That's why I like it. I love Rogue. I love the story. I'll probably never play it again unless they remastered it. I might go back and see how they changed the graphics. But this is a game that I think took a lot of what was great in Black Flag and smashed it together with a super enjoyable story that I wasn't expecting, and I got to basically play and be done with. I was able to look back and sort of ruminate on it. And that's something I can't say for many of the other games, even the ones that are fantastic and are favorites of mine, like Syndicate. So anyway, I hope you guys like these these videos. You know, it's a different style of video. It won't be as in-depth when it's this many titles. If it was just 2 titles, I would have broken them down like I did with Batman versus Witcher and talking about the different aspects and the difference comparisons there. But these are fun to do because there's a lot of games out there that are hitting their 3rd or 4th or 5th in a series, and it's fun to sort of look at them and say, hey, you know, which one's my favorite? It doesn't mean which one's the best, and it doesn't mean you'll agree with me. But what I'd like to know is what you think is the favorite. So go ahead, answer the poll, which I'll put in the video as well, about which one's your favorite. Also, if you get a chance, thumbs up the video if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. And you know what? Peace out and enjoy, well, the rest of your weekend.